Hey everyone, my name is Kevin, and recently I watched a movie that changed how I view horror as a genre. Yeah, I know that's a strong statement, but it's completely true. Not only is the film I watched unconventional and bizarre, but it's also one of the most frustrating cinematic experiences I've ever gone through, and that is saying something, especially with horror. I mean, have you seen some of the they're putting out these days? I mean, really? A beach that makes you old? What are we doing? Now, the film I'm talking about is one called Funny Games, a low-budget Austrian horror film from the 90s. And despite this film garnering a cult following over the years, it is still so out there and so subversive that even nearly 30 years later, people are still debating whether or not it's a good movie, and for good reason. Funny Games is a movie about a family on vacation that become the victims of two strange men that enter their home. Your classic home invasion story, I hear you say. Nothing out of the ordinary, right? Wrong. You see, dear viewers, this film isn't your normal, average, everyday home invasion horror. No, Funny Games is a hate letter to horror films and fans of the horror genre. That's right, this film is a straight-up call-out post for horror, with its director Michael Haneke saying about the film, "I don't like violence, I would never do a thriller or horror film for the sake of doing it, and I would say that Funny Games is a self-reflexive anti-horror film." And guys, if you only knew how true that statement was. And what better way to critique the entire genre of horror than by doing a horror film? When you watch Funny Games, the director's contempt for violence and horror in entertainment is so clear and open that it might as well just be a 2-hour video of the director himself standing there with a megaphone screaming, "Why are you watching this? What is wrong with you, you sick You disgust me." So today I thought we would check Funny Games out to see what its deal is, and maybe we'll even put our little thinking caps on and do some analysis. Just kidding, that's what the video is. I don't know if you caught that. Subscribe? So the film opens on a family of 3, their father George, the mother Anna, and the child Georgie, and their dog Rolfie, as they arrive at their vacation home in Austria for a bit of quality family time together. As they arrive, they see their next door neighbor Fred, who they have plans with later that day, and they notice that Fred is acting a little bit strange, a little sus, as he is seen speaking with 2 young guys dressed in white that the family does not immediately recognize. As the family is settling into the house and getting unpacked, Fred arrives at the home, accompanied by one of the 2 young men he was speaking to earlier. Fred still seems uncomfortable at this point. To be honest, it kind of seems like he's trying not to poop himself as he's walking here a little bit, but he greets the family and makes small talk nonetheless, and the young man introduces himself as Paul, the son of one of Fred's business partners. Later, George and Georgie are out of the house getting the boat ready, and Anna is left alone to prepare dinner as the other young man from earlier, Peter, shows up at the door asking to borrow some eggs. Yeah, this guy looks like he'd be asking for eggs. Don't ask me why, just something about his face. Am I wrong for that? Despite being concerned as to how this man found his way onto the property, Anna gracefully gives him 4 eggs, which he immediately drops on the ground and breaks. And as he's apologizing to her, he accidentally knocks the phone into a sink full of water, breaking it. Anna's clearly pissed about this, but he kind of really needs those eggs though. So he kind of just gives her this helpless look, you know, the Euroid stare, if you will, and she gives him 4 more eggs, this time wrapped up in newspaper. Peter leaves, and now Anna's just kind of alone and pissed off, and all of a sudden the dog starts barking and going crazy, and we see that it's because Paul is now also inside the house too, for some reason. Which, by the way, one of my favorite tropes in horror is when the dog or family pet knows who the bad guy is way before the main characters do, and is like mean to them. I love that. I eat it up. So now both Peter and Paul, these literal strangers, are in the house uninvited, and Paul is kind of just chatting to Anna, making small talk, asking about her husband's golf clubs, asking if he can use them. It's all just weird. It's just weird. And I thought this scene was pretty interesting because even though it's something so mundane and uninteresting, it does a great job of showing that these 2 young guys are extremely willing to overstep personal boundaries and make people uncomfortable. Even though nothing really happens in this scene, like they don't outright hurt or threaten Anna or really give her any concrete reason not to trust them, the film is very subtly hinting to the audience that these 2 guys are not to be trusted. Like, these are definitely not people you would want to have around you when you're on vacation with your family. We cut to George and Georgie as they get the boat ready, and the dog is still freaking out at this point, but he's out of sight, so they just shout at him to be quiet. And as they're shouting, "Be quiet," at Ralphie, we hear him squeal and then abruptly stop barking entirely. Guys, I don't think that's good news for Ralphie. Back at the house, Paul returns George's golf club to Anna, saying it worked wonderfully, and Anna, annoyed that these two are still up in her business, sternly asks them to leave. The two men act confused and try to gaslight Anna and George, who eventually shows up, into thinking that there's been some sort of misunderstanding. Peter also reveals that he yet again dropped the second group of eggs due to him being scared by the dog, and the men say they will leave only if the family give them the rest of their eggs. It's important to mention that over the course of this scene, the tension is rising pretty steadily. I mean, they're both getting pretty impatient, and Paul directly threatens to hurt George when he refuses to hand over the eggs. Like, dude, I have 12 eggs, you broke 8 of them, and you want the last 4? Yeah, go f yourself, buddy. The tension increases until George slaps Paul, at which point Paul takes the golf club and breaks George's leg with it. You know, as you do. Anna comes back in and sees her husband and child on the ground, and it becomes clear to all three of them that these two men are here for nefarious purposes and intend to do them harm. And here is where this film starts cooking with gas, my friends. Paul reveals that instead of hitting a ball to test George's golf club, he used it to kill Ralphie, and leads Anna through a guessing game to find the dog's body. He literally makes her play hot and cold to locate the corpse of her recently deceased pet. Dope guys, really great company. As Anna is looking for Ralphie, Paul does this turn to the camera and he winks at it. This is the first instance of something that this film does a lot, which is obvious and deliberate fourth wall breaks, and it reads to me as the film's way of making the audience feel involved in what's happening to this family, you know, making us feel a sense of culpability for what we're seeing. Kind of like we're sort of in on it in a really twisted way. Anyway, after finding Ralphie, Paul leads Anna to the lake where they see another group of George and Anna's friends, likely also on vacation there. This scene is pretty much an exact parallel of the first scene of the film where George and Anna see Fred talking to the men and acting strange, except now Anna is the one talking to the men and acting strange as her friends try to greet her. This is meant to show you that George and Anna are not their first victims, and the same thing likely happened to Fred and his wife as well. And I mean, Paul does find out where the new friends live in this scene too, so I guess we know who's next. A bit later, the family is led into the living room where they are forced, through violent means, to sit and listen to the two men yap for a bit. When George asks them why they're doing this, Paul divulges that they come from a troubled upbringing and home life, and that Peter's parents are divorced, and that his family are all addicts, and then he immediately confesses that none of that is true, and that actually they come from a very privileged upbringing, and are doing this out of a sense of depression and dissatisfaction with the world. He then says to Anna, "Would you like to hear another?" indicating that this story is also false, alluding to the fact that they're just toying with this family for their own amusement. They give the family 3 or 4 fake life stories just to get a rise out of them, I guess. And I think this is a good time to highlight that these guys give absolutely zero about anything. They don't even really seem to be aggravated or energized or exhibiting any emotion at all. They're kind of just chillin' the whole time. After cycling through obviously fake background stories, Paul proposes a bet to the family of whether or not they will all be dead in 12 hours' time, with Paul himself betting that they will be. When the family refuses to take the bet, because obviously, Paul turns his head towards the camera and asks the audience what we think, whether we think the family has a chance at survival. This is the second time the film deliberately breaks the fourth wall, and again, the script of this movie is intentionally involving the audience in the tragedy that is taking place on screen. Now, a lot of people may find this cheesy or a bit too on the nose, but I think directly asking the audience to bet on whether or not that we think the protagonist will survive is, in my opinion, a great way of adding to the commentary that this movie is clearly trying to do. After this, their attention turns to Georgie as they stuff his head into a pillowcase as a means to get the parents to do what they want. And this is seemingly all a part of some game they're ostensibly playing. Paul makes Anna take off her clothes and then put them right back on, and it's clear that he's not even doing it because he wants to see her naked per se, but really just because he enjoys the control that he has over these people. Georgie then wets himself due to the fear, which creates an opportunity opportunity for him to escape, which he does, Georgie makes it to the neighbor's house with Paul hot on his trail and hides in the house. Georgie then finds a shotgun in the house laying beside the corpse of another young child, which is likely Fred's daughter, Sissy, that is mentioned in the first act of the film. Yeah, that's right, I pay attention to establishing dialogue. You got something to say about it, punk? Paul eventually catches up to Georgie, though, and he tries to shoot Paul with this gigantic shotgun he found, but the gun is unfortunately empty. Back at the house, the couple have been tied up and subdued while Peter calmly watches television. Dude is just straight chillaxin'. It's great for him. Paul then arrives with Georgie and the kid is reunited with his family. Yay. I mean, all of that was just fucking pointless then, I guess. Paul once again brings up the bet that they made earlier, this time handing the gun to Peter for him to kill one of the family members. Via a literal game of what is essentially eeny, meeny, miny, mo, or whatever the Austrian version of that is, I guess. The camera remains on Paul as he goes into the kitchen to get food as we hear a gunshot and some screaming in the background that follows. By the way, I can't stress to you how much this guy specifically unsettles me. He has remained so calm throughout this entire movie, not showing so much as a smidgen of emotion the entire time, and yeah, it makes me extremely uncomfortable. I hate it. The dude just witnessed the murder of a small child that he helped orchestrate and continues to make himself a ham sandwich. Like, first of all, rude. And second of all, why are you buttering the bread for a cold cut sandwich? Is that like a European thing? Do you even taste the butter with the meat on the... Either way, the camera cuts back to the living room where the two young men have a conversation where they realize that the game they were playing is kind of over. Paul calls Peter stupid for apparently playing the game wrong and shooting Georgie instead of keeping him alive, and they decide that they aren't gonna get much cooperation out of the parents after this, so they just leave. Yeah, that's right. They just straight up decide to dip. The next scene is sort of the tipping point of the film and is a continuous shot with no cuts that lasts for over 10 minutes. At first, it's just Anna sitting there in silence in front of her dead child, processing what has just happened. But then she eventually musters up the energy to free herself as the camera pans over to George. He sits there in silence as well for a bit before just letting all of the emotion out and hysterically crying as Anna tries to console him. Eventually, Anna manages to get him on his feet and they attempt to leave together. This shot is probably the most haunting one of the film for me, and I can see a lot of people just turning the film off at this point, frankly, because it is just that horrific. And despite its intensity, this scene is mostly just silence. I'd say like 90% of this scene is just them sitting there in silence, sort of in shock and disbelief, which frankly feels like a long time when the scene is 10 or 11 minutes long. And it's just one of those scenes where it feels so real that you have to kind of watch it with a grimace on your face because it just feels like a snuff film or footage from a documentary or something. The performances are very, very convincing. This scene is meant to hurt you. And I think that's what differentiates this film from other horror movies, in that there's no interesting dialogue here. There's no witty writing to advance the plot forward. There's no movie magic that comes in to save them. It is quite literally just an honest showcase of misery in its purest form. It's not pretty or polished. It's not cinematic. It's not even really entertaining. It's just tough to watch. Once they leave the living room, though, they try to escape the house, but they realize they have been locked inside. They try to call the cops again, but the phone is still broken, so they devise a plan to have Anna escape through the window to get help since George is still badly injured. Anna escapes the property through a hole in the fence and goes running to get help. As she's running to find someone, Anna sees a car coming down the road and she decides not to stop it, I guess out of fear that it could be the two men coming back for them or something. She then sees a second car coming, and angry at herself for not stopping the first one, she decides to stop this one, and guess who the it is? The camera cuts back to George in the house laying a blanket over his son's body as we hear the front door of the house open. George calls out to Anna, thinking it's her, and we see a little golf ball roll across the doorway. menacingly. Paul and Peter walk into the shot and say good morning to George as we see Anna captured and tied up once again. There is then a smash cut to what I assume is a bit later as we see George and Anna on the couch once more, this time looking badly beaten. As they sit there, they're forced to listen to the two men talking about how they're still playing the game, one where one person is left alive and one person is not. We hear them kind of bickering with each other about the rules of the game and who's supposed to die, and then Paul turns his attention to Anna. He informs her that George lost, so he will be the next one to die unless she wants to, quote, step in for him. Whatever that means. George pleads with Anna to not answer anything and just to let them do whatever they're gonna do, because at least then it'll be over quicker. At which point, Paul turns to look right into the camera for the third time in this movie and directly addresses the audience. Without a hint of sarcasm or irony, he says, "We aren't up to feature film length yet. Do you think that's enough? I mean, you wanted a real ending with plausible plot development, right?" Yeah, he literally directly calls out the audience for watching the movie up to this point. He basically straight up says to the audience, "Why are you still watching this? What are you hoping to gain out of this experience? Plot development? You want the heroes to win? You." After this, Peter starts torturing George with a knife in order to get Anna to play the game, which works, and she asks him what she has to do. He says that if she can recite a prayer of her choice perfectly with no mistakes, that she gets to decide who dies and how. And as he's explaining this, Anna grabs the shotgun from off the table, points it at Peter, and shoots him point blank. Finally, right? Finally, this movie gives us something resembling a story arc. Finally, the protagonists have the edge, something we can root for. Finally, there's hope and excitement in this final act of this godforsaken movie. Right? Oh, you guys are gonna be so pissed. After Anna kills Peter with the shotgun, Paul panics and starts frantically looking for the TV remote, and when he finds it, he literally rewinds the very movie we are watching until just before the point where Anna grabs the gun. And this time, instead of Anna getting the gun and shooting Peter, Paul grabs it and shoots George. God, this movie blows, dude. Yeah, that's right. The villains of this film basically have god powers, because you, audience. This whole movie has just been kind of a huge you to its own audience, but that moment specifically is especially egregious. That sucks. I'm sorry. So it's morning time now, and Paul and Peter lead a tied up and gagged Anna onto George's boat, and they go out onto the water. Anna finds the knife that Georgie left on the boat in the first act and tries to free herself, but is caught by Peter, who throws the knife overboard. Paul and Peter are sitting on the boat, just chatting, having some friendly post-murder banter, and Paul asks Peter what time it is. Peter says it's just past 8 a.m. with less than an hour remaining until their bet is over, and then Paul just casually pushes Anna overboard, and when asked why he did it early, he said it's because he was getting hungry. What a piece of shit. They then take the boat to the house of the neighbor from earlier, and Paul asks if he can borrow a few eggs, and then he does that one final look at the camera that is strangely reminiscent of the end of Michael Jackson's Thriller. And that's how the movie ends. Yeah, not really that satisfying, if I'm honest. Now, you might be wondering, why do people like this film? How do people even find the strength to sit through it, let alone enjoy it? And to that I say, exactly. My first impression of Funny Games was that it's not a film that is meant to be enjoyed, per se. It's more of a film that is meant to rethink how you engage with media entirely. It kind of forces the viewer to engage with parts of themselves as an audience member that maybe they don't want to engage with. Because this film is largely dedicated to subversions of the expectations you build up as a consumer of horror. Throughout watching this film, I couldn't count the number of times I saw the writer setting up a classic horror cliche or trope that would give the protagonists the leg up in the fight, only for them to just subvert it every single time. Oh, the kid escapes and finds a gun? Oh, it's over for this dude. Oops, actually, he got caught, and turns out the gun's empty. Oh, the phone starts working again after being submerged in water? Oh, he's gonna call the cops. Actually, wait, no, the battery is dead and no one can hear him. Oh, the wife escaped and is actually free? Quick, hop in that car. Oh, wait, no, the men are the ones driving it and she's captured again. Oh my god, the wife just grabbed the gun and shot one of the main villains? Oh my god, they're gonna live. Wait, sorry, no, this dude has like god powers, I guess, and can just rewind time so it doesn't happen. In increasingly short intervals throughout, this film finds every opportunity to give its audience the middle finger, to the point where it becomes almost an absurdist comedy at times, deliberately subverting expectations in a way meant to frustrate its target audience. And I do say meant to here, because I think that frustration we feel as an audience while watching this film is the intended effect. I think by making it so that the villains can't lose, by removing all of the traditional final girl or last second savior tropes and narratives from horror, we're removing all of the convenience and comfort that those tropes and narratives provide us. Horror is satisfying to watch when you know it's a film, when you know that there's a good chance that the protagonist will win or survive, when you know that the story has a satisfying tension and release, when you know that the conflict resolution is coming. And Funny Games takes the liberty of depriving its viewers of all of that. It says to its audience, no, sorry, nobody is coming to save them. No, the villains don't have any weaknesses, actually. No, there is no hope for these people. And that speaks to what I would consider one of the main themes of this film, which is attempting to distinguish the line between fiction and reality. Unlike any other horror movie I've seen, this film showcases the unavoidable truth that while yes, the characters on screen and what takes place between them is fictional, the spectator, the viewer, is not. We, the horror enjoyers, are real and must confront the fact that we are intentionally involving ourselves in this, albeit fictional, authentic dynamic. So yes, Funny Games didn't actually happen and none of it is real, obviously, but it is a depiction of something real. Home invasions are real, and our desire to see one play out on screen is real too, and that is something that Funny Games forces us to reconcile with. And the main tool that the film uses to do that is the character duo of Paul and Peter. Paul and Peter represent many things, I think, in this movie, but I would say the main thing they represent to me is the notion of spectacle in entertainment, especially in the horror genre. Several times throughout the film, Paul and Peter's victims try to decipher their motives. They ask, why are you doing this? They try bargaining with them, and they even participate in their little games to gather information. But time and time again, as this film likes to do, we're deprived of a rational explanation for any of it. The only hints we are given, in fact, indicate the opposite, that there is no real motive. At one point, George asks Peter, why are you doing this? As he begs for his life, and Peter simply replies, why not? We repeatedly see the men bickering over the rules of the, quote, game they're playing, as if it's a children's board game. After deciding they killed Georgie too early, Paul complains that they won't get anything out of the other two now. All of their actions seem to point to the reality that there really is no motive, other than that this is simply how they choose to entertain themselves. And that's what the film is commenting on, I think, right? Entertainment. Because what does it mean to be entertained by horror? Does the entertainment come from seeing the heroes prevail against all odds? Or does it simply come from seeing carnage on screen? I mean, we have seen a rise in movies that exist almost solely for the gore content. Terrifier is like the biggest horror franchise right now. So if entertainment value really does arise from the violence and not from things like conflict resolution and story and a happy ending, Funny Games asks, why even bother with those things then? Most other horror movies, through things like plot structure, thematic development, and a satisfying, well-written narrative, will allow and encourage their audience to feel aligned with and root for the protagonists, the victims in the situation. But Funny Games makes the counterpoint to that. Funny Games makes the argument that actually, as viewers who signed up specifically to watch terror unfold, you are more aligned with the villain than their victim. By stripping all of those cinematic writing conventions away from the story, we're forced to see an ugly truth that, in a way, we are also kind of rooting for the villains as well when we watch horror. I mean, there's a reason that Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and Art the Clown are the Halloween costumes and not their respective protagonists, because they are the most celebrated characters from those films. And through the characters of Paul and Peter, we are made to feel responsible for the suffering of Anna, George, and Georgie. We as the audience are a part of the games they are playing. We are a part of the violence and torture that has been brought upon this family. The entertainment and enjoyment Paul and Peter get from torturing this poor family is a direct analog of the entertainment and enjoyment we get from it as the audience. Without a convenient plot development or last-second solution, both of which are common in horror writing, we're forced to see the truth laid bare, that Paul and Peter are carrying out the will of the viewer on screen. They are serving the interests of the audience, fulfilling our expectations that we as viewers are only comfortable having, by the way, because we're used to convenient plots and contrived narratives that would never happen in reality coming in to save our protagonists. When Paul asks us if he should keep going because the film isn't long enough yet, or has us bet on whether the family will survive through the night, those are both things I, and I'm sure many of you, have thought while watching other horror movies. Oh, I wonder how they're gonna pad out the runtime of this movie. Oh, I wonder how long they'll drag out that person's death scene. I wonder if that person will even survive to the end of the movie. It is a direct call out to the indifference to suffering we exhibit when we wonder those things, and Paul and Peter's actions on screen are an honest manifestation of those thoughts. Funny Games, to me, can really only be interpreted as an attack on horror fans. My interpretation of it is that it is a direct and explicit diss on people who watch horror films purely for the violence. Paul and Peter are meant to exemplify the viewer's desensitization to violence and indifference to suffering, and the dry, honest depiction of terror in the film is framed as a direct consequence of that indifference. What happens when you don't have a well-packaged, neatly constructed, satisfying plot to go along with your horror? Well, then you just have the horror. You have something that hurts to sit through. You have that sinking feeling that some scenes in this film will give you. You have uncomfortable silences that last for several minutes at a time. You have long, lingering shots that you just wish would end. And you get an ending that, frankly, sucks. And that is the purpose of this film. Funny Games is not an entertaining film in the way we would describe other horror films as entertaining. It has no satisfying beginning, middle, and end. The pacing is all over the place and feels very drawn out at times, and all of the heroes die by the end of it without ever having so much as a chance at survival. Even the physical violence that this film is basically centered around is never shown on camera. When Georgie is killed, when George breaks his leg, when Anna is tied up and gagged, when George is killed, all of these moments happen off camera. So not even someone who watches horror for the violence would walk away satisfied from this film. And I think that's the point. Unlike most other horror films, Funny Games forces you to consider the possibility that sometimes people just get murdered on vacation and nothing happens to the perpetrators, and that's it. Sometimes violence happens and people willingly cheer it on because they've been conditioned to accept it. Sometimes injustice happens. Sometimes people die, and sometimes the victims don't even stand a chance. Sometimes nobody comes to save them. And sometimes nobody even cares. So, do I like this film? No, not really. I mean, I do. I think everything that was intentional about this film was done beautifully and executed perfectly, but unfortunately, I think this film wants you to hate it, and it does a great job of that. This film is the cinematic equivalent of a practical joke, I think. If you don't read into the subtext of this movie and understand what it was trying to accomplish, you would probably walk away feeling like and like you just wasted 2 hours of your time, and you would be right. But if you think about it more and read into the choices that were made, you start to understand the vision a little bit. You start to get the joke, so to speak. And so while I was uncomfortable the whole time and was not really entertained, I don't feel like I wasted my time. In fact, this movie probably made me think way more than any other horror movie I've seen recently. So in that respect, this film has a ton of artistic and creative value to me. So I guess I liked it. I mean, I wasn't entertained or satisfied, but that really wasn't the goal. But also the goal of movies is to entertain, which it doesn't. But also, I thought it was well made, but it was also just really, really hard to watch. I'm confused. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video, and happy Halloween! I thought since this is the last video I'm doing before then that we would have a spooky theme to the video today, hence the lights and stuff. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like on it and consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much in advance. If you want to support the channel, you can do so on my Patreon, where I offer my videos uncensored, as well as a bunch of bonus content that I do only over on the Patreon. So if you want to, go check that out. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna go eat some candy probably, and bye.